So we've come to the Witch History Museum, and I think we're going to go inside and take a look. So we're going to take a tour of this Salem Witch Museum over here, and it happens to have all of the history on the board. Oh. I am looking forward to learning more about this. A witch pit is where all those hanged for witchcraft would be buried. They were not allowed to be buried on consecrated burial ground. We're going to hear a little bit about this guy. Apparently he wasn't very nice. That'll be covered in the presentation. I can't record the actual video, audio when she's giving her speech, but there will be more goodies. These are a few more places you can visit in Salem. The Witch House, which I'm hoping to get over to that, which was Judge Corwin's home. The Witch Pit, located on or near Gallows Hill. This acted as a burial pit. We've had a few more people arrive, so it's getting a little busier. Puritan Meeting House in Salem Village. Gallows Hill, where 19 accused witches were hanged. Howard Street Burial Ground, where is it Jill's or Giles Corey was crushed. And the Rebecca Nurse House, which was a witch victim's home. All right, all seated in the pew, and the show should begin pretty soon. So I am ready to get started with the tour.
So here we are in the Salem Village Woods. I'm gonna hit a button.
The young girls of Salem inform the magistrates that a coven of witches at Salem Village is meeting in the wooded field near Minister Samuel Parris's home. The devil led young girls there to frolic with him and to sign his book and take his oath, which would make them witches, like some of the older women who flew into the field from Salem town on broomsticks. Signing the book was tantamount to selling one's soul to the devil, the black man, or man in black who tempted them there. The girls eventually revealed was a Harvard graduate and former Salem minister of the Puritan faith named George Burroughs.
So here we are in Samuel Parris's house. Seated here is Tituba, and behind her stands her husband, John Indian. So Tituba was the very first woman to be accused of witchcraft during the Salem witch trials. She was not hanged, and this is because after hours of, being tortured, unfortunately, she admitted to being a witch, even though she probably was not one. After a long day of being an enslaved person or a slave, she had to look after Betty and Abigail, and very often their friends would come over. And they said that she would do fortune-telling games with them, which was a common pastime, especially with girls. And they also said that she would tell them stories of dark magic that she'd learned in Barbados, which I'd say is more debatable. I would take that with a grain of salt, of course. So as we continue on, lying in the bed, we were never told exactly who that is, so I'm going to say it's Betty today. The man in the black hat is Dr. Griggs. The man with the book, or the Bible, is Samuel Parris. And in this corner here we have, and I don't usually pick him up, This is Eclipse the cat, if anybody would like to pet him. He's very sweet. His fur is very coarse. That's why it's so hard. And he's reading a brochure, which I think is very cute. So, very soon after Betty and Abigail began experiencing their unusual symptoms, other girls and young women throughout Salem Village started going through the same thing. And this quickly spread across the borders into other towns and villages, encompassing 34 places in all. Basically, everybody from Boston to New Hampshire was involved in one way or another.
The teenage girls of Salem, who accused Tituba and the neighboring men and women of witchcraft, were hired to travel to other towns and villages of Essex County to point out the witches who dwelled there. Everyone was afraid of being called a witch. Brother turned on sister, child on mother, neighbor on neighbor. Old folks, disfigured ones, the mentally disturbed, and those who acted strangely were lined up in the village greens, and the girls pointed out the witches. The sheriff and his pikemen immediately carted them off to jail to await examination, possible trial, and probable execution.
So, we are now, and they're currently in Maine, the state of Maine. It's the town of Wells, Maine, to be exact. This is where George Burroughs' family farmstead was located. George Burroughs is the man with the red hair punching the other guy in the face. There's going to be a little bit of lightning. Are we all okay with lightning here? You can say no if you're not. Okay.
The former Puritan minister of the Salem Village Church, George Burroughs, is accused by the girls of being the devil himself. A noted strongman, Burroughs is captured at his house in Wells, Maine, by the cruel Salem sheriff, George Corwin, and his deputies. But he battles his captors, and when a storm suddenly erupts, the lawmen are terribly frightened, for they are convinced that they have captured the devil himself, and he will strike them down with bolts of lightning. Shaking with fear, the lawmen deliver Burroughs to the Salem judges. He is found guilty of witchcraft and is condemned to hang at Gallows Hill.
Oh, this is the court of Oyer Terminer. It is where everybody who was accused of being a witch was tried, had their trials. It was established by Governor William Phipps, and it was only used for the witchcraft trials. It was located near where the current Salem courthouse now stands. Oyer and determiner was an early modern English phrase meaning to hear and determine, and nothing resembling modern forensic evidence was used in the court of Oyer and Terminer. Instead, they mainly depended on spectral evidence, which was evidence that only the accusers could see, hear, or feel. So basically, let's just mainly for that reason, if you were accused of being a witch, there was almost no chance that you would be acquitted or, proclaimed innocent. These are examples of spectral evidence. They're called familiars. I'm going to push this button.
All witches kept at their side little imps or strange animals called familiars. They were given to witches as pets by the devil, and these little demons could appear or disappear at will, and they could make themselves larger or smaller at will, or so thought the superstitious Puritans. A witch's ward was where familiars sucked bloody milk. I saw Bridget Bishop's familiar, testified John Lauder before the Salem court in 1692. It was a black thing that jumped into my window, and it came and stood before my face. The body of it looked like a monkey, only the feet were like cock's feet with claws, and the face was somewhat more like a man than a monkey's. The black cat is, of course, the most familiar of witch familiars.
why the black cat was the quote-unquote most familiar of witch familiars is because just like how now in Salem it's overrun with dogs, back then it was overrun with cats. So there you go. I'll stand as far back here as I can so you all can see. I love your hat, by the way.
Thank you.
Very, very vintage Nickelodeon. So, here we are at Gallows Hill, where 19 people were hanged for, saying that they were not witches. So, some people believe, and a lot of us have heard, that the victims during the Salem witch trials were burned at the stake. As you're learning today, that was not true. The reason why, people started saying that is because during this witch hysteria in the colonies and during the centuries before it, there were a lot of witch hysterias going on throughout Europe. And in the European countries where witchcraft was a heresy against the Catholic Church, they were burned at the stake. Here it was a felony, which is why they were hanged. I do not believe the death penalty is in Massachusetts any longer.
On August 19th, 1692, about half a mile away from where you are standing now, George Burroughs, thought to be the devil, was hanged at Gallows Hill with 4 others. New England's leading Puritan minister, Cotton Mather, was there, riding a white horse. When Burroughs was on the ladder to hang, wrote eyewitness Robert Califf, he made a speech for the clearing of his innocence with such solemn and serious expressions as were the admiration of all present. His Lord's Prayer drew tears from many, so it seemed to some spectators that it would hinder the execution. But Cotton Mather addressed himself to the people, declaring that the devil has often been transformed into an angel of light, which somewhat appeased the people, and the execution went on.
This guy's a great photo op because they kind of messed up a little bit with his face. No offense to him, of course. So, after a victim's body was left hanging for a day to be an example to others, it was dumped in a nearby ditch called the Witch Pit and half-heartedly buried. It was illegal to remove a body from the Witch Pit, but thankfully, we know that every witch hysteria hanging victim's body was removed and reburied elsewhere secretly, but we know it because we couldn't find any, clothing remains or anything. They were removed and reburied by loved ones and by just decent people in the community. So, here we have Cotton Mather, whom you were introduced to at Gallows Hill. He was a jerk. He was a Harvard graduate, a minister at the North Church in Boston. He was an historian, and he considered himself a scientist. He was very influential in the Puritan community, and he was super into politics. So, I told you guys before that it was illegal to remove a body from the witch pit. Well, allegedly, so they say, Cotton Mather dug up George Burroughs' body, did experiments on his skull because of course he was a scientist, and after doing something to the skull that made it grow in size, he said that that was proof that George Burroughs had been the devil because his skull was abnormally large. So I don't know who here has seen the movie Tangled, but in the movie Tangled, the main character, Rapunzel, has a dream. And you know who else had a dream? Cotton Mather had a dream. He wanted to be the president of Harvard University, like his father before him. So after the witch hysteria, he goes to the college to try and convince them to give him the job. Sorry, but I think that's ridiculous, but do your thing. And they told him no. They said they knew about the role he played in the witch hysteria and basically to get off their property. So he ended up co-founding Yale University, and Yale was named after the man who donated the most money to the project, who went by the name of Elihu Yale, or some people call him Elihu Yale. So that's the story of how Yale was born. Well, that's the abbreviated version. Philip English was the richest merchant in Salem, but he was Anglican, so it was only a matter of time before he and his wife were accused of witchcraft. When this happened, they were able to pay off the jailer, who released them, of course, early, before anybody else, and they escaped to New York State, where they waited out the rest of the witch hysteria. When everything was over, they came back and wanted their mansion stuff and money back. So would I. But Sheriff Corwin, who was considered the most hated man in all of Salem, he was the sheriff that we met in Maine, he was living in their home illegally. So also a jerk. And they tried to go the legal route to get him removed from their mansion, but he didn't want to go. So suddenly one day he dies of a heart attack, whoops, and people were very surprised. He was only 30 years old, he seemed so healthy. So here is where two interesting theories come into play. One of them is more likely to have happened than the other. So the first theory is that during the funeral, Philip English stole the body and held it for ransom. I mean, you get what you get. The other theory, which is more probable, more likely, is that he threatened to steal the body and hold it for ransom. Either way, the Corwin family ended up burying Sheriff Corwin in their cellar where he'd be safe. Eventually, he was reburied in a cemetery, laid to rest next to his uncle, who had been a judge during the witchcraft trials. As for Philip English and his wife, they got their house, stuff, and money back, and after Philip English died, a good chunk of that money was used to build the first Anglican, now Episcopalian church in Salem. It is called St. Peter's, and it's still running. So, after 13 long months, the witch hysteria in Salem finally ended. And it ended when Governor William Phipps's wife was accused of witchcraft. That's when he decided things had gotten too far. He got rid of the court of warrior and terminal immediately. Over the span of a year, everybody who had been arrested for witchcraft was released from jail, because you had to pay a fine to be released from jail. And everyone who had been sentenced to hang for witchcraft was pardoned. So, in addition to the 19 people who were killed for, of course, not saying that they were witches, there was a man named Giles Corey. Some people call him Giles Corey. And he died during an interrogation technique called pressing. You're going to hear a little bit about him and what he's up to these days.
Tradition is long current in Salem, wrote Salem's noted author, Nathaniel Hawthorne, that at stated periods, the ghost of Giles Corey, the wizard, appeared on the spot where he had suffered as the precursor of some calamity that was impending over the community, which the apparition came to announce. Old Giles Corey was a pitiful creature, in his 80s, when he was led to the field beside the Salem jail, now the Howard Street burial ground. On September 19th, 1692, he was laid in a pit and crushed to death with stones by Sheriff Corwin and his deputies, cursing Salem and the sheriff as he died. His wife was hanged at Gallows Hill 3 days later. Nobody knows exactly where old Giles was buried, but as Hawthorne says, his ghost returns to the burial grounds at times of great calamities in Salem. He was seen many times, roaming the graveyard in early 1914, before a fire devastated the city, starting at Gallows Hill and destroying all in its path as it swept to the waterfront. Ironically, the flames leapt over the old homes of the historic district like unseen hands. Giles Corey's ghost continues to appear, as Nathaniel Hawthorne predicted, during times of great disaster and as a reminder of Salem's tragic legacy, the witch hysteria.
And that's the end of our tour, folks. Once again, thank you for doing this with me.